I have as much rage as you have. I have as much pain as you do. I've lived as much hell as you have, and I've kept mine bubbling under for you. Those words, they're not just lyrics. They're the secret diary of millions of women. Women who've been taught to swallow their own emotions to keep someone else comfortable. Today we're talking about why that needs to stop. And what happens when women finally let their rage rise to the surface where it belongs. Welcome back to the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast. I'm Lynn, your host. Right around episode 85, our podcast was renamed to the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast, formerly Moving Forward with Hope, Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast. Please be sure you are subscribed to our podcast. You know when a song just hits different? Like you've heard it 100 times before, but suddenly you're really hearing it. That happened to me with Alanis Morissette's Sympathetic Character. I was doing dishes and this song came on. I just stopped because she was talking about the lives of many women, too many women. She was talking about so many of our lives. In 1998, Alanis was saying things we still struggle to talk about today. So we're unpacking this song. More importantly, we're talking about why millions of women recognized themselves in those lyrics and what that says about how we've been taught to love, to fear, and to disappear ourselves for other people's comfort. Let me read you some of these lyrics. If you haven't really listened to this song, you need to understand what Alanis put out there in 1998. I was afraid you'd hit me if I'd spoken up. I was afraid of your physical strength. I was afraid you'd hit below the belt. But it goes deeper than physical fear. I was afraid of your reducing me. I was afraid of your complete disregard for me. I was afraid of your temper. And then, this is where it gets me every time. I have as much rage as you have. I have as much pain as you do. I've lived as much hell as you have, and I've kept mine bubbling under for you. For you. How many of us have done exactly that? Swallowed our anger, managed his emotions, kept ourselves small and quiet because we were afraid of what would happen if we didn't. Then she lists all the things he was to her. You were my best friend. You were my lover. You were my mentor. You were my brother. You were my partner. You were my teacher. He was everything, and that's the problem. Here's what Alanis understood that most of us are still figuring out. When you make someone your everything, your best friend, lover, mentor, teacher, keeper, anchor, family, savior, you put yourself in an impossible position. Because when someone is all of that to you, you can't afford to lose them, which means you can't afford to be real with them. You can't have needs that conflict with theirs. You can't have emotions that make them uncomfortable. This is about how we've been taught to do relationships. Think about it. How many women do you know who tiptoe around a man's mood, who've learned to read the signs, when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to make themselves invisible? I'm talking about Tuesday night dinners where you don't or can't bring up what's bothering you because he's already stressed. Is he acting stressed just so he doesn't have to hear about it? I'm talking about choosing your words carefully because you know how he gets when he feels criticized or when you become needy. This stuff is everywhere. It's in marriages, dating relationships, families. It's the water we've been swimming in for so long that we forgot it wasn't normal. Until someone like Alanis said, hey, this is actually messed up. Since episode 69, where we explored the Great Divorce and the widening gap between men and women in relationships, we've been digging deeper, unpacking social conditioning, calling out collective blind spots, and confronting the ways patriarchy shows up in our everyday lives. That episode marked a shift for this podcast. From there, we've been unraveling patriarchy from every angle, and yes, sometimes sideways too. We've also been connecting these patterns to narcissism and emotional abuse in ways that aren't often talked about. And then also, head on over to episode 86 and 87, where we break down the pick-me culture. Some of you may know this or may not, but I grew up in this pick-me culture deeply embedded in the evangelical church, and we discuss how the pick-me culture is toxic toward women, and so much more. Listen to those today. And of course, if you are benefiting from the material, our content, head to our tip jar, link in the description, and toss a positive review our way. It greatly helps our podcast, and we appreciate it. Thank you to so many who have left us a positive review. But getting back to these song lyrics, can you believe this was said in 1998? 1998 seemed like such a long time ago. If you tried to talk about this stuff, people would tell you that's just how relationships work. If you said you felt like you couldn't be yourself, you were being too sensitive. We didn't have the language for what Alanis was describing. We didn't have terms like emotional labor or gaslighting. We didn't talk about how women are taught to manage everyone else's feelings while ignoring their own. Alanis was singing about intimidation and coercion and the fear of speaking up. We didn't have the framework to understand this wasn't just personal drama. This was a pattern. Women were just told this is the way it is. She was ahead of her time, but she was also right on time for all the women who needed to hear someone else say it first. Someone who could name the exhaustion of being afraid in your own life. And therein lay the issue. And therein lay the problem. The issue. We were taught to make men our everything. The problem. When someone is your everything, you lose yourself trying to keep them. This podcast exists to discuss the systems that diminish, control, and silence. We focus on what has been overlooked, question what has been normalized, and create space for healing, clarity, and collective strength. We serve as a resource of hope, encouragement, and validation so victims of narcissistic abuse can rebuild their lives and pursue dreams, visions, and intentional living. You can hear it in her voice, can't you? That raw pain from realizing you've been living afraid of someone you love. The grief of understanding you made yourself small for someone who couldn't handle your bigness. When she sings about keeping her rage bubbling under, I feel that in my chest. How many of us have done that? Swallowed our anger, our disappointment, our needs, kept them all bubbling under because we were more afraid of losing him than losing ourselves. The pain isn't just about being mistreated. It's about the slow realization that you gave someone all the power over your happiness, and they weren't equipped to handle that responsibility. But here's what's changed. Women are finally talking about this stuff openly. We have words for emotional labor and financial abuse. We have conversations about red flags and boundaries. That's progress, real progress. Women are making changes, real changes. Women aren't having babies like they used to. They're choosing careers over motherhood, financial independence over security through marriage, education over early families. But let's call this what it is. For generations, the patriarchy needed women to be small, to be passive, powerless, without financial means, without independence, without education, without a voice to speak out. They needed us to tolerate disrespect, to tolerate abuse, to tolerate being disadvantaged, to tolerate our rights being taken away. Because when women have no options, when we have no money, no education, no voice, we stay. We endure. We keep our rage bubbling under. The system was designed to make us dependent, to make leaving impossible, to make speaking up dangerous. Now, a little bit about the system that operates behind the scenes, that seems to keep everything going seamlessly, though invisibly, but a couple of things I want to point out about that system. The patriarchy is not about individual men being inherently evil or women being helpless. It is a social system intentionally created and enforced by men over generations to secure and protect their dominance. From childhood, men were conditioned to believe this hierarchy was natural and right, just as women were conditioned to comply, self-silence, and even police themselves and one another. This mutual conditioning made patriarchy feel normal, leaving it unchallenged for centuries. It was not until women began speaking out and demanding equality that many men were even forced to see patriarchy for what it is. And even then, many chose to defend it because questioning it meant risking the comfort of unearned power. Recognizing that men are both products and active carriers of patriarchy does not absolve them of responsibility. Instead, it highlights the urgent need for both men and women to unlearn these harmful scripts together and to build relationships and communities grounded in mutual respect and equality. So what happens when we stop keeping our rage bubbling under? What happens when we let it rise to the surface? First, it's uncomfortable as hell. We've been trained to see women's anger as dangerous. Too much. We've been taught our job is to smooth things over, not make waves. But here's what I've learned. That rage, it's information. It's your internal alarm system telling you something is wrong, that your boundaries are being crossed, that you're being asked to accept what shouldn't be acceptable. When you stop swallowing that rage, when you stop managing everyone else's emotions at the expense of your own, you start to remember who you actually are. You remember you have opinions that matter. You have needs that deserve to be met. You have a voice that deserves to be heard. And yeah, some people aren't going to like that. Some people will miss the version of you that put their comfort above your own authenticity. But those aren't your people. Your people can handle your bigness. They celebrate your voice. They don't need you to be small to feel good about themselves. Look, I'm not saying don't love people. I'm saying love them from a place of strength, not desperation. Love them because you choose to, not because you have to. 26 years after Alanis sang about keeping her rage bubbling under, maybe it's time we let it bubble up and over instead. Maybe it's time we stop being afraid of our own bigness. Because here's what I've learned. When you stop making other people responsible for your happiness, they stop having the power to destroy it. When you build your own life, you can invite people into it without handing them the deed. And that changes everything. So listen to Sympathetic Character again. Really listen. Ask yourself, what have you been keeping bubbling under? What would happen if you let it rise to the surface? You might be surprised by how much power you've been giving away and how good it feels to take it back. What would happen if all the women did it at the same time? Let me ask you that again. What would happen if all the women did it at the same time? We have additional resources on our website at movingforwardafterabuse.com and visit our Gumroad store at waketheelephant.gumroad.com for downloadable episodes and more. These links are in the description. Visit our website at movingforwardafterabuse.com for additional resources. And of course, we are on Substack and Medium as well. We covered a lot of ground in this episode. Thank you for being here. This is Lynn, and this has been another episode of the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast. Thank you for listening. Drop us a positive review if you are enjoying our show. I'll catch you in the next one. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The content shared is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please seek help from a qualified professional or contact a local crisis hotline.